The first mistake most people make is believing that friendship, as you have been taught to understand it, is a bond of mutual affection that exists outside the machinery of advantage. It doesn't. What you call friendship is, in almost every case, a temporary alignment of interests, a quiet negotiation where each party has calculated what the other can provide and decided the price is acceptable. And the moment that calculation changes, the warmth evaporates. You are not surrounded by people who love you for who you are. You are surrounded by people who have not yet found a better option. And right now, at this very moment, someone in your life is smiling at you while quietly deciding what you are still worth. You feel that. Somewhere beneath the noise of your daily routine, you have always felt it. The small silences when you mention a success. The flicker of relief in a man's eyes when you confess a setback. The way invitations stop arriving the week after you lose a title or a paycheck or a marriage. You have told yourself you are imagining it. You are not. What you are sensing is the real structure of human relations, and once you see it clearly, you will never again mistake a transaction for a bond. Consider first the court of Louis XIV, where the entire architecture of friendship was dismantled and rebuilt as a machine of control. When Louis assumed personal rule in 1661, the French nobility was still dangerous. These were men with castles, private armies, regional loyalties, and long memories of the Fronde, the civil wars that had nearly destroyed the crown during his childhood. They remembered that they had once held real power, and they remembered that kings could be defied. Louis did not try to befriend them, not in the way you mean the word. He did something far more effective. He built Versailles, a palace so vast and so expensive that a nobleman who wanted to remain relevant had to live there, had to attend the king's rising ceremony, had to hold the king's shirt, had to compete for the honor of handing him his stockings. And because they were all living at Versailles, spending fortunes on clothing and gambling and ceremony, they were no longer in their provinces building independent power. They were bankrupting themselves for proximity to a man who would never see them as equals. The Duc de Lauzun learned this in 1671, when he was imprisoned, without trial, for overstepping in his courtship of the king's cousin. He had assumed that years of intimacy, of shared jokes and royal confidences, had earned him some latitude. He was wrong. The king's affection was a leash, not a bond, and the moment Lauzun pulled against it, the leash became a noose. Watch the men around you the same way Louis watched his court. And the friend who insists on buying you drinks is not generous. He is purchasing the right to expect your loyalty later. The colleague who shares office gossip with you is not confiding in you. He is testing whether you will repeat it, and thereby handing you a rope you may eventually hang yourself with. Tomorrow, when a man offers you something warm and unsolicited, ask yourself one question. What would he do if I stopped being useful? Not what he says he would do, but what his pattern of behavior suggests. If the answer is uncomfortable, you have not discovered an enemy. You have discovered a normal person. It didn't say discovered a normal person. And that discovery leads directly to the next layer of the problem, which is not that people will abandon you when you fall, but that many of them will actively accelerate the fall. Take the case of Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great Roman orator, and his relationship with Octavian, the young man who would become Augustus. In the years after Caesar's assassination in 44 before Christ, Cicero was the most respected voice in Rome. He had survived political storms, he had crushed the Catiline conspiracy, he had written works that would define Latin prose for 2,000 years, and in the chaos after Caesar's death, he made a fatal miscalculation. He decided that the young Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, was a useful tool. Octavian was only 19, seemingly inexperienced, and Cicero believed he could be flattered, guided, and then discarded. He wrote to his friends that the boy should be praised, honored, and then disposed of. He told the Senate that Octavian was a gift from the gods. And Octavian, for his part, played the role perfectly. He called Cicero father. He wrote him respectful letters. He asked for his advice. He let the old man believe that he was shaping the future of Rome. Then, in 43 before Christ, Octavian formed the second triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus. They drew up proscription lists, names of men to be executed without trial, and their property seized. Antony demanded Cicero's name. Octavian did not resist. He did not warn his old mentor. He did not hesitate. He signed the list, and Cicero was hunted down by soldiers on the 7th of December, 43 before Christ, on the road from his villa. He leaned his head out of his litter, and a centurion cut his throat. His head and hands were brought back to Rome and nailed to the rostra, the speaker's platform where he had delivered his greatest orations. The boy who had called him father watched it happen. Understand what this means for you. The men who flatter you most warmly are often the ones most aware of your usefulness, and that awareness is a timer, not a bond. The junior colleague who tells you that you are the smartest person in the room is not admiring you. He is learning from you, and once he has learned enough, he will begin to see you as a competitor rather than a resource. The younger man who calls you mentor is calculating the exact moment when he no longer needs your introductions, your reputation, your blessing. He will not tell you when that moment arrives. He will simply stop returning your calls, and you will hear from a third party that he has taken a position you once wanted. To protect yourself, you must do what Cicero did not. Never believe that your usefulness to a younger man confers any immunity. Never mistake deference for loyalty. It vernos, sap your difference for loyalty. And tomorrow, look at the person who compliments you most frequently, and ask what they are positioning themselves to take. The answer will not be comfortable, but it will be accurate. This leads to the third truth, which is even colder, and it concerns the people who are closest to you, the ones you call brothers. Think of the relationship between Alexander the Great and Clytus the Black, a man who had literally saved Alexander's life. At the Battle of the Granicus in 334 before Christ, Alexander was fighting in the front ranks, as he always did, and he was surrounded by Persian cavalry. A Persian noble named Spithridates raised his sword to strike Alexander from behind, and Clytus, one of Alexander's oldest companions, a man who had served under his father Philip, cut off the Persian's arm at the shoulder. The sword fell harmlessly. Alexander survived. Clytus had known Alexander since childhood. He had fought beside him in every campaign. He had watched him grow from a prince into a conqueror. And in 328 before Christ, in the city of Maracanda in Sogdia, now Samarkand, Alexander hosted a banquet. Wine flowed. Wine flowed. Flatterers praised the king, comparing him to Heracles and the gods, and suggesting that his achievements surpassed those of his father Philip. Clytus, drunk and disgusted, spoke up. He said that Alexander's glory was built on the blood of Macedonians, that Philip had been the greater king, that Alexander owed his life to men like him. Alexander, in a rage, threw an apple at him. Clytus kept talking. Alexander called for his guards. They did not move. And then Alexander, in a blind fury, seized a spear from a guard and drove it through Clytus. The man who had saved his life died on the floor of the banquet hall, and Alexander spent the next 3 days in his tent, refusing food, weeping, and calling out Clytus's name. But Clytus was still dead. Alexander's grief did not bring him back. The friendship did not survive a single moment of public contradiction. This is not an aberration. It is the rule. The people closest to you are the most dangerous, not because they hate you, but because they have the most invested in a particular version of you. When you change, when you succeed beyond what they expected, when you no longer need them in the old way, their affection curdles. The friend who helped you when you were broke will resent you when you are rich, not because he wants your money, but because your wealth forces him to confront his own stagnation. The friend who was your equal will pull away when you outrank him, because your presence is a daily reminder of what he has not done. And if you are foolish enough to let your guard down around them, to speak honestly about your ambitions, to show them your plans, they will use those confidences against you in the moment they feel threatened. Tomorrow, when you are with your oldest friends, notice what happens when you mention a genuine achievement. Not a complaint, not a problem, but a win. Watch the micro-expressions. The half-second delay before the congratulations. The way the subject changes quickly. No, that delay is the real feeling, and it is not joy. What you are seeing is the recalculation, the quiet adjustment of the ledger, and you must learn to read it. This brings us to the fourth claim, which sits beneath all the others, and it is the one you will resist most fiercely, because it strikes at the story you tell yourself about your own goodness. Examine the life of Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, the French diplomat who served every regime from Louis XVI to Louis Philippe, and who understood better than anyone that loyalty is a costume worn for the benefit of the current ruler. Talleyrand was born into the high aristocracy in 1754, and he entered the church not out of faith, but because his family needed a bishopric to maintain its status. He became a bishop, then a revolutionary, then Napoleon's foreign minister, then the man who negotiated Napoleon's downfall. He betrayed everyone. He betrayed the church, the monarchy, the revolution, Napoleon, and the Bourbon Restoration. And each time he did it so smoothly that the new regime found him indispensable. The key scene is the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815, after Napoleon's first abdication. Talleyrand arrived as the representative of defeated France, a nation that had spent 2 decades terrifying Europe. He should have been a supplicant. Instead, he walked into a room of victorious powers and immediately began to manipulate them. He identified the cracks in the alliance, the mutual suspicion between Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, and he exploited them. He introduced the principle of legitimacy, arguing that only the restoration of legitimate monarchs could bring lasting peace, a principle that conveniently protected France's interests. Within weeks, he had transformed France from a defeated enemy into an ally, and he had secured a seat at the table for a country that had no right to be there. The lesson is not that you should betray everyone. The lesson is that Talleyrand survived, because he never once believed in the permanence of any arrangement. He knew that today's ally is tomorrow's obstacle, that today's principle is tomorrow's liability, and that the only durable asset is his own ability to navigate the shift. You must adopt the same clarity. The loyalty you feel toward your company, your boss, your social circle, is an emotional attachment to a temporary arrangement. It feels noble. It feels like identity. But it is a leash that other people are holding, and they will pull it the moment it serves them. Tomorrow, examine one loyalty you hold without question. Ask what it costs you. Ask who benefits from your refusal to consider alternatives. If the answer is that someone else benefits more than you do, you have found a leash, not a bond. And the fifth truth follows from this, because once you see the leash, you must understand what happens to men who never see it. Consider the fate of Pompey the Great, the Roman general who was, for a time, the most powerful man in the world. Pompey had conquered the East, cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, and been awarded 3 triumphs before the age of 40. He was rich, famous, and beloved by his soldiers, and he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He trusted Julius Caesar, They had been allies in the first triumvirate, along with Crassus, and Pompey had even married Caesar's daughter Julia. When Julia died in childbirth in 54 before Christ, followed by Crassus in 53, the personal bonds that held the alliance together dissolved. But Pompey did not see it. He believed that his friendship with Caesar, their shared history, their years of collaboration, would protect him. He believed that Caesar would not march on Rome. He believed that the Senate's authority, which Pompey had chosen to defend, would be enough. In January of 49 before Christ, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with a single legion, an act of open war against the Republic. Pompey still did not grasp the situation. He told the Senate that he had only to stamp his foot and legions would rise from the soil of Italy. But the legions did not rise. Caesar moved south, and Pompey fled to Greece. Even then, he had the larger army, the better position, and the support of the Senate. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 before Christ, Pompey had nearly twice as many infantry as Caesar. He should have won, but he was paralyzed by his own assumptions. He had spent his entire career believing that his reputation, his alliances, his friendships would carry him through. He had never prepared for the moment when those things failed. Caesar's veterans, hardened by years of brutal campaigning, routed Pompey's larger force. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he expected to be welcomed. The young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, advised by his regents, decided that a living Pompey was a liability. As Pompey stepped ashore near Pelusium, he was stabbed to death by a man who had once served under him. His head was cut off and presented to Caesar when he arrived days later. Caesar wept. He was genuinely moved by the sight of his old friend and rival's head. But Pompey was still dead, and Caesar was still the master of Rome. The lesson is brutal and practical. The men who believe in friendship are the men who fail to prepare for the moment when friendship ends. They are the men who do not build independent resources, who do not cultivate alternative options, who do not maintain a clear-eyed assessment of the other party's interests. They are the men who die on beaches while their old friends weep over their severed heads. Tomorrow, look at your own position. If the person you trust most turned on you tonight, would you survive it? Would you have resources, allies, information that did not depend on them? If the answer is no, you are not in a friendship. You are in a hostage situation, and you are the hostage. This brings us to the final section, the deepest layer, the one that changes everything once you accept it. Look at the career of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany and dominated European diplomacy for 3 decades, and who understood that the only true security is the ability to walk away. Bismarck became Minister-President of Prussia in 1862, at a moment when the Prussian king, Wilhelm I, was locked in a constitutional crisis with his parliament over military funding. The king was considering abdication. Bismarck did not beg for the position. He did not promise loyalty to the parliament or to the king. He simply stated that he would rule, that he would collect taxes and fund the army without parliamentary approval, and that the great questions of the day would be decided not by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood. The king kept him. Over the next decade, Bismarck engineered wars against Denmark, Austria, and France, each one carefully limited, each one designed to isolate Prussia's enemies and strengthen Prussia's position. He unified Germany in 1871, not through friendship, but through the precise manipulation of fear, ambition, and self-interest. He maintained power for another 19 years, not because the Kaiser loved him, but because the Kaiser needed him. And in 1890, when the new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, decided he no longer needed Bismarck, he dismissed him. Bismarck retired to his estate, wrote his memoirs, and spent his final years warning anyone who would listen that the system he had built was fragile. He had not been loved. He had not been protected by friendship. He had been useful, and the moment his usefulness ended, so did his power. But here's what Bismarck understood, that you must understand. He was not surprised. He had known all along that his position was conditional. He had built his life so that the loss of power, while painful, did not destroy him. He had properties, investments, a family, a legacy. He had never confused the office with the man. And that is the final instruction. You must build your life so that you can walk away from any person, any position, any arrangement, without collapsing. Not because you are paranoid, but because you are realistic. The man who cannot walk away is a slave, no matter what title he holds. The man who can walk away is free, no matter what he loses. Tomorrow, identify one area of your life where you have surrendered your ability to walk away. It might be a job, a relationship, a social circle, a city. Do not necessarily walk away, but begin, quietly, to build the conditions under which you could. Save money. Is cultivate a skill. Make a contact outside your current circle. Do it without announcing it. Do it the way Bismarck built his alliances, carefully, without sentiment, with a clear eye on the shifting balance of power. The man who does this is not cold. He is awake. And awakening is the only real protection there is. This brings us to the sixth and final claim, which concerns not how you treat others, but how you treat yourself once you have seen the machinery. The hardest betrayal is not discovering that others were never really your friends. The hardest betrayal is realizing that you have been the instrument of your own deception all along, that you wanted the lie more than they wanted to tell it. Every man who has been used, betrayed, discarded, or undermined has at some point ignored a signal. The signal was always there. A hesitation. A too quick promise. A confidence shared with someone who had no reason to keep it. A pattern of small disappearances whenever things got hard. You saw these things, and you chose to interpret them as anomalies because the alternative was too costly. The alternative was admitting that you had invested years in a relationship that was never what you told yourself it was. So you doubled down. No bird see. You gave more, trusted more, confided more, hoping that your investment would force the other person to become what you needed them to be. It never works. It cannot work. You cannot buy loyalty with vulnerability. You can only buy contempt. The men who have power over you are not the men who are smarter than you. They are the men who see you more clearly than you see yourself. They see your need to be liked, your reluctance to believe ill of others, your hunger for a bond that asks nothing in return. And they use it. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but they use it. And you let them. The way out is not bitterness. Uneasy. Bitterness is just another form of attachment. The way out is clarity. Cold, unflinching clarity about what people are, what they want, and what they will do when the cost of loyalty exceeds the benefit. Once you accept that friendship is a transaction, you can finally begin to choose your transactions wisely. You can choose to associate with people whose interests genuinely align with yours, not because they love you, but because they benefit when you succeed. You can choose to be useful, to be reliable, to be someone whose absence would create a real cost for others. That is not love. But it is the closest thing to security that human beings ever get. And the man who accepts this sleeps better than the man who believes in fairy tales, because he's never surprised. He is never blindsided. He is never the one standing on a beach, waiting for a friend who has already sold him. He is the one who saw it coming, and who built his escape before the blade arrived. So when you ask why no one is really your friend, you are asking the wrong question. The question is not why others fail you. The question is why you ever expected them not to. The 6 truths you have heard tonight are not 6 separate insights. They are one insight, seen from 6 angles. The courtier at Versailles learned that proximity is not loyalty. The old orator learned that flattery is a countdown. The conqueror's companion learned that closeness is a liability. The diplomat learned that survival requires detachment. The general learned that trust is a strategic error. The chancellor learned that freedom is the ability to walk away. All of them are the same truth, wearing different clothes. People are not your friends. No. People are actors in a system of interests, and you are one of them. And the only question that matters is whether you will play the game with your eyes open or closed. Close your eyes, and you will be devoured. Open them, and you will see that the game was never about friendship at all. It was about power, and you have been giving yours away. If this articulation of the machinery matches what you have always suspected, but never heard said plainly, then you are part of a very small group of men who are willing to look at the world without flinching. Subscribe so that you do not miss the next articulation, which concerns the specific techniques that people use to make you feel obligated to them, the debts they manufacture, the favors they perform, the guilt they install, and how you can recognize and neutralize these maneuvers before they cost you anything. One technique in particular is so subtle that most men never notice it until it has already worked, and it begins with a question that sounds like kindness.